Day 66 since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The Federal Bureau of Investigation currently possesses an unidentified DNA profile. Investigators hold physical custody of a discarded tactical glove found at the primary scene. Agents have reviewed high-definition surveillance footage showing a masked and armed intruder. The individual responsible for this intrusion remains at large and entirely unhindered. Law enforcement agencies possess the exact genetic code of the perpetrator. They have calculated the precise physical measurements and tactical patterns of the suspect. The criminal justice system appears completely paralyzed despite holding the definitive keys to the investigation. The core anomaly of this case is not a lack of physical evidence. The primary issue is the bureaucratic paralysis that prevents an arrest warrant from being authorized. We must examine the specific administrative barriers preventing federal agents from moving forward. The physical data tells a highly detailed story of premeditated residential infiltration. The institutional response demonstrates a conflicting narrative of jurisdictional friction and stalled processing protocols. You are watching Evidence with John, where we analyze the forensic data behind active criminal investigations. Subscribing and enabling notifications ensures you will receive the update the moment this legal gridlock breaks. We track the evidentiary paper trail and the biological material until the system is forced to act. The specific data points available in this active investigation reveal a highly calculated criminal operation. The perpetrator executed deliberate maneuvers designed to bypass standard residential security measures. Federal authorities have cataloged these movements with exact precision across multiple data platforms. The general public assumes that possessing a verified DNA profile guarantees an immediate tactical manhunt. The operational reality of forensic processing and jurisdictional authority is far more complicated and deeply flawed. The Phoenix Field Office and the Pima County Sheriff hold different critical pieces of this forensic puzzle. Their documented inability to synthesize this data has created a prolonged window of opportunity for the suspect. The collected evidence profile includes biological material and digital footprints that should identify the suspect immediately. The delay is entirely administrative and institutional. We are witnessing a systemic failure to process critical forensic data in a timely manner. The jurisdictional boundaries between local and federal agencies are actively hindering the apprehension process. Every passing hour degrades the tactical advantage that the recovered biological evidence should provide. The local authorities maintain control over specific aspects of the initial crime scene documentation. The federal authorities control the advanced genetic analysis capabilities required to process the suspect profile. This division of resources has generated a procedural stalemate at the most critical phase of the investigation. The suspect benefits directly from every administrative delay and every interagency communication breakdown. The physical evidence collected at the residence remains locked within a complex chain of custody dispute. This structural inefficiency transforms a highly solvable forensic puzzle into an ongoing administrative crisis. The primary subject of this investigation is an 84-year-old woman. Nancy Guthrie requires daily cardiovascular medication to maintain her basic physiological stability. She is also recognized as the mother of a prominent national television broadcaster. The legally established timeline begins on the evening of January 31st. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her directly to the private residence. He observed the automated garage door fully close at 9:50 in the evening. The residential perimeter remained entirely secure for approximately 4 hours following this visual confirmation. A critical digital security breach occurred at exactly 1:45 the following morning. An armed individual systematically disabled the external residential surveillance network. Family members arrived at the property for a standard welfare check at 11:56 that morning. They discovered the subject missing from the premises without any secondary communication. The physical structure showed no immediate signs of forced entry at the primary access doors. The initial law enforcement assumption pointed toward a medical emergency or a standard wander scenario. The arrival of specialized forensic technicians shifted the official classification parameters immediately. The crime scene investigators documented a calculated physical extraction rather than a random disappearance event. The analytical timeline requires careful examination of the 4-hour window of secure isolation. The unknown perpetrator utilized that exact chronological window to bypass the external cameras. The speed and technical efficiency of the infiltration indicate extensive prior reconnaissance of the property layout. This event does not align with an opportunistic crime committed by an unorganized individual. The chronological sequence of events demonstrates a targeted operation focusing specifically on this isolated residence. The initial 48 hours of the investigation yielded highly significant physical material. The secured scene contained biological evidence that immediately escalated the necessity for federal agency involvement. A seemingly perfect residential abduction was permanently compromised by the forensic reality of the physical environment. The suspect minimized digital tracking but failed to maintain complete biological discipline during the extraction process. The collection of this material shifted the investigation from a search operation to a forensic manhunt. The crime scene data clearly indicates that the perpetrator anticipated the presence of surveillance equipment. The subsequent actions suggest a methodology designed to maximize the time before law enforcement notification. The resulting delay in discovery provided the suspect with a 10-hour tactical head start. This operational window was crucial for securing the subject and evading immediate police containment measures. The Federal Behavioral Analysis Unit has constructed a highly specific physical profile of the suspected perpetrator. Photogrammetry analysis of the surviving surveillance footage confirms the suspect is a biological male. The unidentified suspect measures between 1.75 and 1.78 meters. This individual utilizes a black 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack during the residential infiltration. This specific equipment choice provides significant forensic insight into the operational parameters of the intrusion. A 25-liter capacity allows for the concealed transportation of specialized mechanical disabling tools. The internal volume is sufficient to hide tactical equipment without restricting the physical mobility required. The recovered surveillance footage documents the suspect actively exploiting established visual blind spots. The perpetrator demonstrates an advanced spatial awareness regarding the exterior residential camera network. The precise angle of approach indicates a deliberate tactical effort to minimize facial exposure. The subject systematically bypassed the primary perimeter sensors without triggering the external security alarms. This level of environmental manipulation requires extensive pre-operational surveillance of the target location. The perpetrator mapped the exact overlapping fields of view for every external surveillance camera. He identified the precise physical coordinates where the digital security coverage was mathematically weakest. The tactical movements recorded on the footage demonstrate highly practiced physical discipline and balance. The subject maintains a low center of gravity while navigating the exterior concrete walkways. This specific biomechanical movement pattern is frequently observed in individuals with specialized tactical training. The target selection process presents a highly anomalous data point within this federal investigation. The subject directed this sophisticated residential infiltration against an 84-year-old resident. This demographic profile typically contradicts the standard risk assessment parameters of professional property offenders. The calculated nature of the intrusion suggests a primary objective beyond simple financial theft. The methodical dismantling of the digital security infrastructure required significant time on the target. Property offenders typically prioritize speed and minimal environmental interaction during unauthorized residential breaches. The suspect prioritized security system neutralization over immediate physical access to the interior structure. The documented operational sequence reveals a highly specific and professional behavioral forensic signature. The perpetrator systematically approached the property utilizing the pre-calculated camera blind spots. The subject then neutralized the primary external communication nodes before attempting physical entry. The tactical precision displayed during the initial infiltration phase is objectively remarkable for residential crimes. The footage confirms the presence of an armed individual operating with clear tactical intent. The visible weaponry indicates a high degree of preparation for a potential physical confrontation. The deliberate nature of these actions eliminates the hypothesis of a random opportunistic crime. The perpetrator executed a specific operational plan focusing exclusively on this exact private residence. The physical data confirms a professional-grade residential infiltration utilizing specialized tactical equipment. The suspect maintained absolute digital and visual discipline throughout the primary approach vector. The initial operational phase demonstrates flawless execution of a premeditated tactical infiltration strategy. The perpetrator successfully neutralized the external electronic perimeter without alerting the remote monitoring services. The subject gained unrestricted physical access to the primary structure while maintaining complete anonymity. The operational methodology suggests a perpetrator highly familiar with modern residential electronic security systems. The execution phase of the intrusion proceeded according to a highly structured tactical plan. The suspect achieved the primary objective of penetrating the secure residential envelope without detection. The professional methodology utilized during the infiltration phase heavily contrasts with the subsequent events. The perpetrator maintained complete control over the external environment during the initial tactical approach. The internal residential environment introduced unpredictable variables that disrupted the planned operational timeline. The suspect executed the entry protocols flawlessly but committed a critical error during extraction. The physical evidence left at the primary scene contradicts the sophistication of the approach. The perpetrator compromised the entire tactical operation by failing to maintain strict biological containment. The subsequent forensic discoveries fundamentally altered the trajectory of the ongoing federal investigation. The initial visual inspection of the interior environment revealed immediate indicators of a physical struggle. Crime scene technicians isolated a specific biological fluid deposit within the primary living area. The laboratory analysis definitively matched this blood evidence to the missing 84-year-old. The verified presence of the victim's blood immediately elevated the investigation to a critical level. The physical altercation produced secondary biological transfers that permanently compromised the perpetrator's anonymity. Investigators recovered a single tactical glove discarded near the primary point of physical extraction. This physical artifact represents the most significant forensic breakthrough in the entire federal investigation. The tactical glove yielded a highly viable sample of unidentified foreign genetic biological material. The federal laboratory successfully extracted a complete DNA profile from the recovered physical evidence. The genetic sequence provides law enforcement with an absolute biological identifier for the suspected perpetrator. The recovery of this material theoretically guarantees the eventual identification of the armed intruder. The possession of a complete genetic profile shifts the operational focus towards suspect apprehension. The jurisdictional authorities executed a targeted tactical operation on February 10th in Rio Rico. This specific geographical location is situated approximately 60 miles from the primary crime scene. The law enforcement deployment resulted in the temporary detention of a specific male individual. The suspect apprehension appeared to validate the rapid deployment of federal forensic laboratory resources. The public anticipated an immediate formal indictment based on the collected biological crime scene evidence. The detaining agency subsequently authorized the unconditional release of the apprehended male individual. The authorized release of the primary suspect introduces a massive contradiction into the official narrative. The authorities possess the definitive genetic code extracted from the crime scene physical evidence. They hold visual confirmation of the armed perpetrator operating within the residential security perimeter. The recovery of the victim's blood confirms the violent nature of the physical extraction. The intersection of these data points should provide sufficient probable cause for a permanent arrest. The legal reality of the situation reveals a severe institutional paralysis within the investigating agencies. The procedural release of the Rio Rico suspect highlights a critical failure in evidence application. The biological data provides absolute scientific certainty regarding the identity of the physical perpetrator. The administrative parameters governing the judicial utilization of that data remain highly convoluted. The investigating entities possess the necessary forensic material to secure a federal criminal conviction. The interagency friction actively prevents the immediate utilization of this evidence in a judicial setting. The public records indicate a complete systemic failure to leverage the collected genetic material. We continuously monitor these critical forensic developments on Evidence with John to expose administrative failures. You should subscribe and enable notifications to track the deployment of this critical genetic evidence. The resolution of this case depends entirely on the proper processing of the collected material. The authorities hold the absolute biological key to resolve this violent residential abduction event. The administrative structures refuse to insert that forensic key into the judicial ignition system. The Tactical glove remains in an evidence locker while the perpetrator maintains complete physical freedom. The genetic profile is fully sequenced but remains administratively detached from an active arrest warrant. The visual confirmation of the armed suspect provides a clear operational target for federal agents. The jurisdictional complications effectively neutralize the tactical advantage provided by the physical crime scene evidence. The perpetrator left a definitive biological signature during the violent extraction of the elderly victim. The local and federal agencies successfully isolated and sequenced that exact human genetic signature. The resulting data points provide an undeniable mathematical link to a specific human being. The temporary apprehension in Rio Rico demonstrated the operational capability of the assigned task force. The subsequent release of that individual demonstrates the administrative dysfunction hindering the legal prosecution. The physical evidence demands immediate tactical action against the identified genetic biological profile. The bureaucratic reality dictates a prolonged period of operational stagnation and frustrating legal uncertainty. The authorities possess a flawless biological map leading directly to the responsible male individual. The institutional mechanisms required to legally follow that forensic map are currently non-functional. The forensic science operated perfectly, while the practical judicial application failed completely and utterly. The perpetrator's biological material remains the central focal point of the ongoing federal criminal inquiry. The administrative gridlock continues to delay the execution of a legally binding arrest warrant. The physical separation between the collected genetic evidence and a formal indictment remains unexplained. The operational timeline dictates that the suspect maintains a significant geographical and tactical advantage. The forensic reality is that the perpetrator cannot permanently erase the collected genetic signature. The investigative agencies must resolve their internal administrative conflicts to utilize the biological data. The physical evidence from the residential scene provides a complete narrative of the violent event. The biological material definitively connects the unidentified suspect to the missing 84-year-old. The institutional failure to act upon this data point represents a significant procedural anomaly. The legal system currently prioritizes administrative protocols over the immediate apprehension of a violent suspect. The collected genetic material waits in a secure facility for proper judicial authorization and application. The physical reality of the crime scene remains entirely preserved within the federal laboratory database. The authorities have the definitive answer locked securely inside a sterile biological evidence container. They currently lack the administrative consensus required to officially open that container and act. Possessing biological evidence constitutes a singular procedural step in modern forensic investigations. Securing the administrative authority to test that material represents an entirely distinct operational challenge. The collected genetic profile requires a highly secure environment for proper evidentiary processing. The primary investigative resources experienced a severe operational diversion during this critical forensic window. An opportunistic individual identified as Derek Calella initiated a secondary criminal sequence. He generated fraudulent extortion communications targeting the immediate family members of the missing resident. These communications demanded financial compensation in exchange for the safe return of the elderly subject. The federal agents were forced to allocate significant technological resources to track these digital communications. The trace protocols eventually revealed a complete lack of physical proximity to the primary suspect. Calella possessed absolutely no operational connection to the initial residential infiltration event. His actions represented a purely financial exploitation of a highly publicized active federal investigation. The subsequent apprehension of this individual consumed valuable chronological resources during a critical phase. Law enforcement tactical units prioritize the interception of these communications over physical scene processing. The diversion allowed the primary suspect to increase his geographical distance from the target location. The extraction of financial capital became a secondary motive imposed by an unrelated malicious actor. The investigative framework suffered a temporary collapse while pursuing this manufactured digital evidence trail. This operational distraction occurred precisely when the biological evidence required immediate interagency processing coordination. The tactical glove remained secured in temporary storage while agents interrogated an unrelated financial opportunist. The entire investigative momentum shifted from forensic biology to digital communication tracing. The primary perpetrator benefited immensely from this chaotic diversion of specialized federal law enforcement resources. The timeline demonstrates a severe misallocation of analytical personnel during the first operational week. The fraudulent letters created a false narrative regarding the fundamental motive of the residential breach. The authorities temporarily operated under the assumption of an active hostage negotiation scenario. The biological realities of the crime scene eventually forced a return to the original forensic data. The financial exploitation angle proved to be a highly destructive investigative dead end. The federal resources realigned their operational focus back to the physical material collected on site. The delay in processing the genetic material allowed interagency procedural conflicts to fully materialize. The bureaucratic infrastructure began to impose strict limitations on the handling of the physical evidence. The local authorities maintained physical custody of the primary biological samples recovered from the residents. The federal agency possessed the advanced technological infrastructure required to sequence the genetic material rapidly. The intersection of these two realities generated a profound administrative conflict between the investigating entities. The biological profile of the suspect became a logistical hostage within the evidence management system. The initial momentum generated by the crime scene discoveries completely evaporated under administrative friction. The procedural guidelines regulating evidence transfer superseded the immediate tactical requirement to identify the perpetrator. The investigative focus transitioned from a rapid manhunt to a slow logistical dispute over jurisdiction. The operational efficiency of the Joint Task Force deteriorated rapidly under these specific administrative conditions. The suspect continued to operate without restriction while the investigating agencies debated internal processing protocols. The physical extraction of an 84-year-old resident demands an immediate tactical response. The bureaucratic reality of multi-agency investigations routinely subverts this basic operational requirement. The physical evidence collected at the residence remains a highly potent but currently unutilized forensic asset. The interagency communication logs document a severe deterioration in professional cooperation regarding this physical evidence. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos established a rigid procedural stance regarding the genetic material. The federal agency officially requested the immediate transfer of the biological samples to their primary facility. The Quantico National Laboratory possesses the highest tier of genetic sequencing capabilities available to investigators. Sheriff Nanos explicitly denied this federal request and retained physical control of the forensic material. The local administration opted to utilize a private forensic laboratory located in the state of Florida. This administrative decision introduced severe geographical and procedural delays into an active missing persons investigation. The federal agents expressed documented frustration regarding the utilization of a decentralized commercial testing facility. The jurisdictional dispute highlights a fundamental flaw in the cooperative framework of multi-agency task forces. The biological evidence represents the only viable method for identifying the armed residential intruder. The local authorities prioritized administrative autonomy over the rapid deployment of federal analytical resources. This specific bureaucratic conflict actively prevents the immediate tactical utilization of the suspect profile. The legal parameters surrounding the biological evidence present a secondary and significantly more complex complication. The identification of the suspect through genetic matching does not guarantee a comprehensive criminal prosecution. The judicial system requires a specific evidentiary threshold to authorize severe criminal charges. The current investigation severely lacks the critical component known as corpus delicti within legal frameworks. The physical absence of the 84-year-old victim limits the available prosecutorial options. A positive genetic match to the tactical glove only places the suspect at the residential scene. The prosecution can legally prove unauthorized entry and the presence of a weapon during the infiltration. They cannot legally establish a homicide charge without the physical recovery of the missing resident. The biological material definitively proves the occurrence of a violent physical struggle within the residence. The blood evidence alone is statistically insufficient to secure a maximum judicial penalty without secondary confirmation. The suspect could theoretically face only standard burglary charges despite the violent nature of the extraction. This legal reality forces investigators to proceed with extreme procedural caution regarding the suspect identification. An immediate arrest based solely on the genetic material could permanently jeopardize a future homicide prosecution. The authorities require secondary data points to elevate the operational charges from infiltration to lethal violence. The ongoing dispute over the laboratory selection further complicates the timeline for securing this necessary data. The suspect remains shielded by a combination of jurisdictional friction and strict legal evidentiary requirements. The entire federal investigation currently hinges on the delayed processing schedule of a private commercial laboratory. The local law enforcement administration defends this decision, citing specialized familial genetic testing capabilities. The federal authorities maintain that their centralized national database provides superior comparative analytical power. This continuous administrative friction directly serves the tactical interests of the unidentified armed perpetrator. You can subscribe to Evidence with John to receive immediate alerts regarding these specific jurisdictional conflicts. We consistently monitor the administrative decisions that dictate the pace of complex federal investigations. The human element of this investigation has produced nothing but procedural delays and institutional infighting. The commanding officers continue to debate the proper geographical destination for a discarded tactical glove. A completely different category of evidence bypassed this administrative chaos entirely on the night of the intrusion. The biological systems of the victim were actively transmitting precise digital metrics to a remote server. The human investigators argued over physical evidence while a silent machine recorded the deciding moment. The digital infrastructure surrounding the 84-year-old resident included advanced physiological monitoring equipment. Medical records confirm the surgical implantation of a highly sophisticated cardiovascular pacemaker device. This internal hardware continuously transmitted biological telemetry to a synchronized mobile cellular application. The application maintained a constant data stream recording her exact cardiac rhythms and electrical impulses. The technological ecosystem functioned perfectly throughout the initial phase of the residential infiltration. The system recorded standard physiological responses when Tommaso Cioni departed the residence at 9:50. The external security cameras experienced their catastrophic digital failure at exactly 1:45. The internal biological monitor continued to broadcast a stable cardiovascular rhythm during this critical vulnerability. The armed intruder successfully breached the physical perimeter while the medical device transmitted standard data. A severe anomaly occurred within the cardiovascular telemetry data at exactly 2:30 that morning. The digital connection between the internal medical hardware and the external cellular receiver terminated completely. The remote server logs record an abrupt cessation of all biological data packets at that precise millisecond. The investigation must categorize this digital severance using three highly specific technical hypotheses. The first hypothesis suggests a sudden and catastrophic depletion of the internal device battery system. Medical engineers consider this electrical failure statistically improbable given the recent maintenance history of the unit. The internal power supply contained sufficient chemical energy to operate continuously for another 48 months. The hardware possessed multiple redundant fail-safes designed specifically to prevent an unexpected total system shutdown. The second hypothesis involves the deliberate deployment of localized electronic jamming equipment by the suspect. The perpetrator demonstrated sufficient technical capability to neutralize the external wireless surveillance camera network. Applying similar signal disruption technology to a Bluetooth-enabled medical device remains highly plausible. The suspect may have utilized a broadband radio frequency emitter to isolate the internal medical hardware. The third hypothesis addresses the fundamental biological function of the cardiovascular monitoring equipment. The pacemaker transmits data only when it detects an active electrical current within the human heart. The total cessation of digital transmission strongly correlates with a complete physiological systemic collapse. The internal sensors programmed to monitor the cardiac muscle experienced a permanent absence of biological activity. The digital silence recorded at 2:30 provides a definitive chronological marker for the investigation. This timestamp represents the exact moment the 84-year-old subject ceased biological data transmission. The authorities possess the precise minute when the residential abduction escalated into a lethal scenario. The medical telemetry transforms a vague timeline into a highly structured chronological forensic map. The digital data confirms the suspect remained inside the residence for at least 45 minutes. The time between the camera failure and the pacemaker disconnection indicates a prolonged physical interaction. Professional property extractors rarely maintain an active presence within a compromised structure for that duration. The extended timeline suggests a specific operational objective that required significant physical exertion or coercion. The recorded blood evidence mathematically aligns with the sudden termination of the cardiovascular digital telemetry. The physical struggle inevitably triggered the biological crisis that permanently silenced the internal medical hardware. The investigating agencies must confront the stark reality presented by this synchronized digital medical data. The local police department continues treating the active file exclusively as a missing persons investigation. The federal behavioral analysts recognize the pacemaker disconnection as the definitive marker of a homicide event. This procedural contradiction prevents the deployment of specialized recovery teams dedicated exclusively to locate human remains. The suspect utilized sophisticated methods to conceal the biological outcome of the violent residential extraction. The internal medical device bypassed all external tampering efforts to deliver one final undeniable data point. The digital silence speaks far more clearly than the administrative arguments occurring between the investigating agencies. The cardiovascular telemetry provides the missing context required to interpret the discarded physical biological evidence. The armed intruder did not merely transport an elderly woman away from her secure residence. The perpetrator actively neutralized a functioning biological system at exactly 2:30 in the morning. We continuously analyze these overlooked technological data points on Evidence with John to expose the truth. You should subscribe and enable notifications to follow our forensic breakdown of this critical medical evidence. The exact cause of the digital disconnection remains the central medical mystery of the entire investigation. The authorities cannot definitively determine if the suspect utilized technology or physical violence to stop transmission. The final recorded heartbeat exists as a permanent digital artifact isolated on a remote medical server. The exact timestamp permanently redefines the parameters of the suspect profile and the required law enforcement response. The chronological data completely eliminates the possibility of a peaceful or medically stable physical extraction process. The internal hardware documented the exact moment the victim crossed the critical threshold of biological viability. The silent signal at 2:30 transformed a missing person incident into a no-body homicide scene. The current status of the federal investigation presents a highly disturbing portrait of institutional paralysis. The active criminal file officially enters its third consecutive month without a single authorized arrest warrant. The primary residential crime scene remains completely frozen under strict local law enforcement jurisdictional control. The tactical glove, containing the suspect genetic profile, currently resides within a Florida commercial laboratory facility. The federal agencies await the final analytical report required to authorize a national tactical manhunt operation. The individual identified as the Backpack Man continues to operate entirely outside the criminal justice system. The suspect maintains absolute physical freedom while the bureaucratic machinery processes the forensic biological material. The investigative focus currently prioritizes administrative evidence handling over active field deployment and suspect apprehension protocols. The tactical reality dictates that the perpetrator expands his geographical advantage with every passing administrative hour. The fundamental motivation behind this highly sophisticated residential infiltration remains completely opaque to federal crime analysts. The execution of a professional tactical breach against an 84-year-old target defies analytical logic. The perpetrator demonstrated infiltration capabilities typically reserved for high-value corporate espionage or specialized military operations. The suspect systematically erased his digital footprint while bypassing multiple layers of modern residential security infrastructure. The specialized resources expended during the infiltration far exceed the financial value of standard residential property. The authorities must determine who orchestrated a targeted extraction requiring such advanced technological countermeasures and planning. The operational precision initially displayed suggests the direct involvement of a highly organized entity rather than a solitary actor. The suspect received specific instructions to acquire the target while neutralizing the surrounding external digital infrastructure. The resulting operational failure regarding the biological evidence suggests a secondary breakdown in the tactical command structure. The physical struggle and the discarded tactical equipment contradict the flawless execution of the initial approach vector. The Federal Behavioral Unit cannot definitively conclude the ultimate objective of the violent residential extraction process. The active investigation lacks the necessary contextual data to establish a coherent motive for the targeted assault. The financial status of the victim's extended family provides a highly speculative and currently unverified analytical avenue. The investigating authorities maintain strict operational silence regarding any potential links to external organized criminal organizations. The prolonged physical absence of the victim severely limits the deployment of standard prosecutorial legal strategies. The American judicial system requires an identified primary motive to secure a maximum judicial penalty upon capture. The current evidentiary profile provides a perfectly clear picture of the methodology but obscures the underlying objective. The jurisdictional dispute regarding the genetic material continues to consume highly valuable analytical and administrative resources. The local authorities consistently defend their private laboratory selection while the federal agents demand centralized investigative control. The processing timeline for specialized forensic genetic genealogy requires significantly more duration than standard federal database testing. The commercial facility must sequence the profile and cross-reference the data against massive public genetic repositories. This complex biological methodology requires weeks of continuous computational analysis to generate a viable suspect lineage. The biological profile remains the only viable mechanism to break the current operational and tactical investigative stalemate. The definitive identification of the specific suspect will ultimately unravel the structural hierarchy of the entire operation. The authorities require the apprehended suspect to explain the precise sequence of events following the digital disconnection. The definitive answers regarding the sudden termination of the medical telemetry exist exclusively with the armed intruder. The physical location of the victim's biological remains currently dictates the entire trajectory of the federal investigation. The recovery of the biological subject represents the absolute foundational prerequisite for any future homicide prosecution proceedings. The physical evidence collected at the residence provides a definitive biological map leading toward the violent perpetrator. The administrative entities must finalize the processing of the genetic material before initiating the tactical apprehension phase. The law enforcement agencies possess the data necessary to resolve this complex residential infiltration and extraction event. They lack the institutional coordination required to translate that biological data into a physical arrest warrant. The suspect utilizes this administrative delay to continuously obscure the final location of the elderly subject. The forensic science will eventually identify the exact individual who disabled the exterior surveillance camera network. The resulting legal prosecution depends entirely on the successful navigation of these current interagency jurisdictional conflicts. Justice for Nancy Guthrie is currently waiting in line for a delayed commercial forensic laboratory report. Data extracted from implanted medical devices is fundamentally altering how investigators define a witness. This specific investigation provides a critical examination of modern digital forensic ecosystems. The traditional parameters of physical evidence no longer dictate the boundaries of a criminal inquiry. A residential property now functions as a highly integrated network of continuous digital surveillance. The external security cameras and the internal cardiovascular pacemaker create an overlapping grid of verifiable data. These synchronized electronic systems generate an objective timeline immune to physical human manipulation. The digital hardware records exact mathematical parameters without any psychological distortion or biological memory degradation. This technological reality forces criminal perpetrators to fight a continuous secondary battle against invisible data networks. The armed intruder successfully neutralized the primary optical sensors but failed to anticipate the internal telemetry. The resulting data points provide an undeniable mathematical record of the violent physical interaction. The integration of cardiovascular telemetry into criminal prosecutions establishes a new precedent for violent offenses. Medical privacy laws complicate the rapid acquisition of this data during active missing persons investigations. The Authorities must navigate strict legal protocols to access physiological telemetry stored on remote medical servers. This administrative requirement provides perpetrators with a crucial window to establish distance from the primary scene. Property owners must recognize that external optical security systems represent only the primary layer of defense. The true forensic value lies within the synchronized data networks operating silently inside the physical structure. The core failure identified in this case exists entirely within the administrative processing of this evidence. The legal framework governing forensic data transfer simply cannot match the processing speed of modern technology. The ongoing jurisdictional dispute between the local and federal laboratories demonstrates this critical systemic vulnerability perfectly. The digital infrastructure captures the exact reality of the crime scene with absolute temporal precision. The human administrative elements consistently introduce severe operational delays that directly benefit the suspected perpetrator. The technology successfully gathered the objective truth regarding the residential infiltration and the subsequent violent extraction. The human authorities ultimately retain the exclusive power to determine exactly when that truth becomes actionable. The federal agents currently possess the biological signature required to identify the armed residential intruder. The legal system absolutely knows the identity of the individual who executed this highly calculated operation. They simply lack the administrative consensus necessary to authorize the deployment of a federal tactical team. We will cover every forensic development and legal maneuver as this complex jurisdictional dispute inevitably concludes. You should subscribe and enable notifications to track the authorization of the impending federal arrest warrant. Will the centralized federal laboratory or the private commercial facility finally deliver the definitive genetic match? The administrative answer dictates whether an elderly victim receives legal justice or permanent bureaucratic silence. Until that specific gridlock breaks, the cardiovascular data from 230 remains the defining forensic artifact. That silent internal pacemaker represents the only voice within this federal file left entirely unmuted.